The day the numbers flashed across the television screen, my heart stopped. I sat on my threadbare couch, a half-empty coffee mug trembling in my hands, staring at the lottery ticket pinched between my fingers. 6 numbers, unremarkable digits scrawled in cheap ink, had just aligned with fate. $22 million. The kind of money that could rewrite a life. My life. 58. I spent decades scraping by, raising my son Ethan alone after his father walked out, working double shifts at the diner until my knees ached and my dreams withered. Now, the universe had handed me a miracle. Or so I thought. I didn't know then that this windfall would crack open the fault lines in my family, exposing greed, betrayal, and a darkness I never imagined in my own blood. I called Ethan that night, my voice shaking with joy. He was 32, living in the city, chasing a career in finance that never seemed to materialize. He'd always been ambitious. My boy, with his father's charm and a hunger for more than our small-town life could offer. I told him about the win, expecting his laughter, maybe a whoop of excitement. Instead, there was silence. Then, a clipped, "That's great, Mom. Really great." I should have heard the edge in his voice, the way it tightened like a coiled spring. But I was too caught up in visions of paying off the mortgage, buying him a car, maybe even helping him start that business he always talked about. I wanted to share this with him. He was all I had. The next morning, I drove to the lottery office in a daze, my old pickup rattling down the highway. The process was surreal forms, signatures, tax discussions that made my head spin. By the end, I had a check that felt heavier than the paper it was printed on. I deposited it into a new account, separate from the joint one Ethan and I had shared since he was a teenager. Call it instinct. Something told me to keep this fortune at arm's length, at least until I could think clearly. I wasn't ready for how that decision would ignite everything. Ethan showed up at my doorstep 2 days later, unannounced, his sleek city clothes out of place against the peeling paint of my porch. His smile was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. He hugged me, called me Mom in that soft way that used to melt me when he was a boy. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd helped him with math homework, where we'd cried together when his father left. He asked about the money, casual at first, then pressing. How much was left after taxes? Had I thought about investments? Did I need help managing it? His questions came too fast, his fingers drumming on the table. I laughed it off, said I was still figuring things out. But his eyes narrowed, just for a moment, and I felt a chill I couldn't explain. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's visits became frequent. He brought wine, expensive bottles I knew he couldn't afford on his salary. He talked about his dream starting a hedge fund, buying a penthouse, living the life he was meant for. Each time, he nudged me toward the money. "You don't want to just sit on it, Mom. Let me handle it. I know people." I started to see a stranger in my son's face, someone calculating, someone who looked at me like I was a vault to be cracked. I told him I'd hired a financial advisor, a kind woman named Clara who'd helped me set up a trust. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't need a stranger, Mom. You have me." Then the whispers started. Small things at first. Neighbors asking if I was okay, their voices laced with pity. A cashier at the grocery store mentioned hearing I'd been acting strange. I brushed it off, chalking it up to small-town gossip. But then Clara called, her voice tense. Someone had contacted her office, claiming I was mentally unstable, unfit to manage my own finances. They'd suggested a conservatorship, with Ethan as the overseer. My stomach dropped. I remembered the way Ethan had watched me sign those lottery forms. How he'd asked if I was feeling all right when I forgot a word mid-sentence. It wasn't concern in his eyes. It was strategy. I confronted him that night. He stood in my living room, his hands in his pockets, his face a mask of innocence. "Mom, I'm worried about you," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "You're not yourself. This money, it's too much stress." I wanted to scream, to shake him until the boy I raised came back. Instead, I asked him to leave. He did, but not before promising to take care of me. The door clicked shut, and I sank to the floor, my heart pounding. My son, my only child, was plotting against me. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat up, staring at the walls of the house I'd fought to keep, the house where Ethan had grown up. Memories flooded May's first steps, his laughter, the way he'd clung to me when nightmares woke him. Had I missed something? Had I failed him somehow? Turned him into this? I didn't know then that this was only the beginning, that Ethan's betrayal would deepen, pulling me into a battle for my sanity, my freedom, and the truth about the family I thought I knew. The days after Ethan's visit blurred into a haze of paranoia. I started noticing things, me keys misplaced, my phone left in odd places, emails I didn't remember sending. I catch myself second-guessing, wondering if maybe I was slipping, if the stress of the money was fraying my mind. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't me. This was Ethan, weaving a web to trap me. I called Clara, who confirmed my fears. Someone had been digging into my medical records, requesting old prescriptions, even contacting my doctor to inquire about erratic behavior. The paper trail led back to Ethan's name, though he'd used a lawyer friend to cover his tracks. My son wasn't just greedy. He was ruthless. I decided to fight back, but quietly. I didn't want Ethan to know I was onto him. I met with Clara in secret, at a coffee shop an hour away from town. She was a sharp woman, her gray hair pulled back, her eyes kind but steely. She laid out the stakes. If Ethan succeeded in having me declared incompetent, he could control the trust, the money, everything. I'd lose my autonomy, maybe even my home. "We need evidence," Clara said. "Something to prove he's manipulating you." I nodded, my hands trembling around my coffee cup. I didn't want to believe my son could sink so low, but I had to protect myself. I started keeping a journal, documenting every strange occurrence, every conversation with Ethan. I hid it in a locked drawer, the key tucked inside an old jewelry box. I installed a security camera outside my front door, telling myself it was for burglars. But really, it was for him. The footage showed Ethan stopping by when I wasn't home, lingering on the porch, once even trying the door. My heart broke watching him, this stranger wearing my son's face. I remembered the boy who'd drawn me crayon pictures, who'd promised to always take care of Mommy. Where had he gone? Ethan's next move came faster than I expected. A letter arrived, official looking, from a law firm I'd never heard of. It requested my presence at a hearing to discuss my mental fitness. My hands shook as I read it, the words blurring through tears. Ethan had filed a petition, claiming I was delusional, that I'd been making reckless financial decisions, that I needed protection. Protection. The word burned. I called Clara, who arranged for a lawyer, a man named Tom with a no-nonsense demeanor. He told me to stay calm, to act normal around Ethan. Don't tip him off, Tom said. We'll build a case. Pretending was agony. Ethan came over for dinner, all smiles, asking about my day like nothing was wrong. I cooked his favorite, lasagna, and we sat at the table, the air thick with unspoken truths. He talked about his job, some new deal he was chasing, but his eyes kept drifting to my hands, my face, like he was searching for cracks. I forced a smile, asked about his plans, all while my stomach churned. After he left, I checked the camera. He'd lingered in his car, typing furiously on his phone. I wondered who he was texting, what lies he was spinning. The hearing was set for a month later, giving me time to prepare but also time for Ethan to tighten his grip. He started calling daily, his tone shifting between concern and condescension. Mom, you forgot our lunch date last week, he'd say, though I knew we'd never made plans. You left your stove on again, he claimed, when I hadn't cooked all day. Gaslighting, Clara called it. He was planting doubts, not just in me but in everyone around me. Friends stopped by less often, their smiles tight, their questions probing. Had I really seemed off lately? I started to feel like a stranger in my own life. One night, I found a note slipped under my door. No signature, just a scrawled message, "Be careful. He's not who you think." My blood ran cold. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but it wasn't Ethan's. I showed it to Clara, who urged me to take it to Tom. He ran a background check on Ethan's recent contacts, uncovering a name, Rachel. She was Ethan's ex-girlfriend, someone he'd dated years ago, before things fell apart. I remembered her Vigalia quiet girl with sad eyes, who'd always seemed out of place in Ethan's fast-talking world. Why would she warn me? And what did she know? I tracked Rachel down through an old mutual friend. She agreed to meet me at a diner, far from Ethan's orbit. She looked older than I remembered, her face lined with worry, her hands fidgeting with a napkin. He's dangerous, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. He did this to me. Too tried to make me think I was crazy when I wouldn't give him what he wanted. She told me about Ethan's debts, his gambling, his desperation to climb the social ladder. He'd seen my lottery win as his ticket out, and when I didn't hand it over, he turned on me. Rachel's words hit like a punch. My son wasn't just misguided. He was a predator. Rachel's warning echoed in my mind as I drove home, the headlights cutting through the dark. I felt like I was unraveling, each revelation about Ethan pulling at the threads of the life I'd built around him. I'd raised him alone, poured every ounce of love and sacrifice into making him strong, hoping he'd grow into a man who'd make me proud. Instead, he'd become someone who saw me as an obstacle, a means to an end. The weight of that truth pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. But I couldn't let it break me. Not yet. I started digging deeper, with Clara and Tom's help. Tom hired a private investigator, a gruff man named Paul who specialized in financial fraud. Paul uncovered a trail of Ethan's debts, hundreds of thousands owed to loan sharks, credit card companies, even a shady investment group. He'd been living a lie, projecting wealth while drowning in red. The lottery win wasn't just a temptation for him. It was his lifeline. I pictured him in his sleek apartment, surrounded by things he couldn't afford, plotting to take what was mine. The thought made me sick, but it also steeled my resolve. Paul also found emails between Ethan and his lawyer friend, a man named Greg. They were careful, using coded language, but the intent was clear. They were building a case to paint me as unstable. Greg had even contacted a psychiatrist to testify, someone Ethan had paid off to exaggerate my symptoms. I felt violated, like my life was being dissected by strangers. But Paul's findings gave us leverage. Tom filed a counterpetition, accusing Ethan of fraud and coercion. It was a risky move. If we lost, could backfire, making me look paranoid. But I was done playing the victim. Ethan's calls became more insistent, his tone sharper. "Mom, you're not talking to anyone weird, are you? People are worried." I played along, keeping my voice light, but every word felt like a lie. I started noticing cars parked near my house, unfamiliar faces watching from a distance. Once, I saw a man in a hoodie across the street, his phone pointed at my window. I told Paul, who confirmed it was one of Ethan's contacts, likely gathering evidence of my supposed instability. I felt hunted in my own home. One night, couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, my journal open, pen trembling in my hand. I wrote about Ethan, about the boy he'd been, the man he'd become. I wrote about the pain of loving someone who could hurt you this way. Then I heard a noisy, soft creak from the back porch. My heart raced. I grabbed the kitchen knife, my pulse hammering in my ears. The security camera feed showed a figure moving in the shadows, too blurry to identify. I called Paul, who told me to lock the doors and stay put. By the time he arrived, the figure was gone, but the lock on my back door was scratched, like someone had tried to pick it. The next morning, I found another note: "Stop fighting, or it gets worse." This time, I recognized Ethan's handwriting. The realization hit like a slap. My son wasn't just manipulating me, he was threatening me. I showed the note to Tom, who added it to our case. He urged me to get a restraining order, but I hesitated. A piece of paper wouldn't stop Ethan, and deep down, I still hoped I could reach him, pull him back from whatever darkness had taken hold. I decided to confront Rachel again. She was reluctant, scared, but agreed to meet at a park. She told me more about Ethan's past, how he'd borrowed money from her, lied about his finances, even forged her signature on a loan. When she'd threatened to expose him, he'd spread rumors about her mental health, costing her job and her reputation. "He's good at this," she said, her voice trembling. "He makes you doubt yourself." I asked if she'd testify. She hesitated, then nodded. "For you, I will. But you need to be ready. He won't stop." Rachel's story gave me clarity, but it also broke something in me. I went home and pulled out old photo albums, Pictures of Ethan as a child smiling at birthday parties. Hugging me on Christmas morning. I traced his face with my finger. Tears falling onto the pages. I'd given him everything. And now he was tearing me apart. But I wasn't just fighting for the money. I was fighting for the truth. For the life I'd built. For the woman I was before this betrayal. I called Clara and told her I was ready for the hearing. No more running. No more pretending. The night before the hearing, I sat alone in my living room. The house quiet except for the tick of the clock. I thought about justice. About what it meant to hold my son accountable. I thought about loyalty. About the love that still lingered despite everything. And I thought about redemption not just for Ethan, but for me. Could I find a way to forgive him? Could I rebuild from this wreckage? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him take me down without a fight. The hearing was held in a sterile courtroom. The kind of place that stripped away warmth and left only facts. I sat beside Tom. My hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. Ethan was across the room, dressed in a sharp suit, his face calm, almost serene. He didn't look at me, not once. It was as if I'd become invisible to him, just a hurdle to clear. The judge, a stern woman with gray streaks in her hair, called the room to order. My heart pounded as Ethan's lawyer, Greg, stood to present his case. He spoke with confidence, painting me as a woman unraveling under the weight of sudden wealth forgetful. Erratic, prone to delusions. He cited witnesses who'd seen me acting strangely, neighbors I'd trusted, manipulated by Ethan's lies. I felt exposed, like my life was being torn open for strangers to judge. Tom countered with our evidence ball's findings. Rachel's testimony. The threatening notes. Rachel took the stand, her voice shaking but resolute. She told the judge about Ethan's patterns, his deceit, how he'd tried to destroy her life when she stood in his way. I watched Ethan's face as she spoke. His calm cracked, just for a moment, his jaw tightening. I wanted to believe it was shame, but I knew better. It was anger. When Tom presented the security footage of Ethan tampering with my door, the courtroom grew quiet. The judge's eyes narrowed, and I felt a flicker of hope. But Ethan was prepared. He took the stand, his voice steady, his eyes glistening with practiced emotion. He talked about his concern for me, how the money had changed me, how he only wanted to protect me. He was convincing, charismatic. The boy I'd raised now weaponizing his charm against me. I wanted to scream, to tell the judge he was lying. But Tom squeezed my hand, urging me to stay silent. My turn came next. I stood, my legs trembling, and told my story. I spoke of the lottery win, Ethan's pressure, the gaslighting, the fear. I didn't cry, though I wanted to. I looked at Ethan as I spoke, hoping for some sign of remorse, but his face was stone. The judge called a recess, and I stepped outside, the air heavy with late summer heat. Clara found me, her face lined with worry but also determination. "You did well," she said. "The truth is on your side." I wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at me. What if the judge saw me as Ethan Dida confused? Aging woman who couldn't handle her own life. I thought of my mother, who died in a nursing home, her mind slipping away. Was that what Ethan wanted for me? To lock me away, to take everything. When the hearing resumed, Tom called a surprise witness, Dr. Ellis, a psychiatrist I'd seen at Clara's urging. She'd evaluated me weeks earlier, confirming I was sound of mind, sharp despite the stress. Her testimony was clinical, unshakable, dismantling Ethan's claims. Greg tried to discredit her, but the judge wasn't swayed. She adjourned the case for deliberation, promising a ruling within days. I left the courtroom drained, my body heavy with the weight of what I'd just done. I'd fought my son in a public arena, laid bare our broken bond for all to see. That night, Ethan called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. His voice was different, quieter, almost broken. "Mom," he said, "why are you doing this to me?" I laughed, a bitter sound I didn't recognize. "You're asking me that? After everything?" He was silent for a long time, then said, "I just wanted to help us both." I hung up, my hands shaking. "Help us." His words felt like a blade, twisting in the wound of his betrayal. The ruling came 3 days later. The judge denied Ethan's petition, citing insufficient evidence and troubling indications of coercive intent. My trust remained mine, my freedom intact. But there was no victory in it, only a hollow ache. I'd won, but at what cost? Ethan was ordered to stay away, a temporary restraining order in place. I didn't know if he'd obey, but I knew he'd never look at me the same way again. And neither would I. I spent the next week in a fog, trying to reclaim my life. I went back to the diner, not because I needed the money, but because I needed normalcy. The regulars welcomed me, their smiles warm, but I felt like a ghost. I kept seeing Ethan's face in the courtroom, the way he'd looked through me. I wondered if I'd ever really known him, or if I'd loved a version of him that never existed. Clara urged me to see a therapist, to process the trauma, but I wasn't ready. I needed to face this on my own terms. Then, one evening, I found a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, just my name in Ethan's handwriting. My heart raced as I opened it, expecting another threat. Instead, it was a single page, his words shaky, uneven. "I'm sorry," it began. "I was lost. I still am." He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't make excuses. It was just him, raw and broken. I sat on my porch, the letter in my hands, tears streaming down my face. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope, not for reconciliation. Not yet, but for something else. Redemption. Maybe. For both of us. Ethan's letter stayed with me, a weight in my pocket, a whisper in my mind. I read it over and over, searching for meaning in the spaces between his words. Was he truly sorry? Or was this another ploy? I wanted to believe in the boy I'd raised, the one who'd once promised to protect me. But trust was a fragile thing, shattered by his actions. I tucked the letter into my journal, alongside the notes of his betrayal, a reminder of the line between hope and naivety. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I wasn't ready to let go either. I started rebuilding my life, piece by piece. Clara helped me invest the money wisely, setting up charities in my mother's name, Funding scholarships for kids like Ethan once was. I wanted the money to mean something, to be more than a curse. But every decision felt heavy, shadowed by the fear that Ethan was still out there, watching, waiting. The restraining order kept him at a distance, but it couldn't erase the memories or the ache in my chest. I missed my son, even after everything. That was the cruelest part. Love didn't vanish, no matter how deep the hurt. One afternoon, Paul called with news. Ethan had left town. His apartment cleared out. His phone disconnected. No one knew where he'd gone. Part of me was relieved. Couldn't hurt me if he was far away. But another part, the mother in me, panicked. Where was he? Was he safe? I hated myself for caring. But I did. I asked Paul to keep looking. Not to confront Ethan, but to make sure he was alive. Paul agreed, though his voice held a warning. Don't let him pull you back in. I nodded, though he couldn't see me, and hung up, my hands trembling. The weeks stretched into months, and life settled into a new rhythm. I volunteered at the community center, teaching cooking classes to kids from rough homes. Felt good to give back, to see their smiles, so much like Ethan's when he was young. But every laugh, every small victory, was tinged with loss. I'd won the battle, kept my freedom, my money, but I'd lost my son. Or maybe I'd never had him. Not the way I thought. The doubt gnawed at me, a constant companion. Then, one rainy evening, I saw him. I was driving home from the diner, the wipers slapping against the windshield, when I spotted a figure on the side of the road, soaked and hunched. It was Ethan. My heart lurched. I pulled over, my hands gripping the wheel. He looked thinner, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. He didn't see me at first, just kept walking, head down against the rain. I rolled down the window and called his name. He froze, then turned, his expression unreadable. "Mom," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. I told him to get in. He hesitated, then climbed into the passenger seat, dripping water onto the upholstery. We sat in silence, the air thick with everything unsaid. Finally, I asked, "Why are you here?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at his hands, cracked and dirty. "I had nowhere else to go," he said at last. My throat tightened. I wanted to hug him, to yell at him, to demand answers. Instead, I drove him to my house, the place he'd tried to take from me. Inside, I gave him dry clothes, made him coffee. He sat at the kitchen table, looking small, broken. "I messed up," he said, his voice raw. I thought the money would fix everything. I listened as he poured out his story debts that spiraled. Pressure from dangerous people. A desperation that blinded him. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't expect it. He just wanted me to know. I sat across from him, my heart torn between love and anger. "You hurt me," I said, my voice steady despite the tears. "You tried to destroy me." He nodded, his eyes on the floor. "I know." I didn't know what to do with him. Part of me wanted to call the police, to enforce the restraining order, to protect myself. But another part saw the boy I'd raised, lost and broken, asking for a chance to make things right. I told him he could stay the night, but only one. He nodded, gratitude flickering in his eyes. I lay awake that night, listening to the rain, wondering if redemption was possible, if we could ever be a family again. By morning, Ethan was gone. No note, no goodbye, just an empty guest room and a lingering sense of his presence. I checked the house, half expecting something missing, but everything was in place. Except for one thing, my journal. It was open on the kitchen table. A new page written in Ethan's hand. "I'll make this right, Mom. I promise." My heart ached, but I didn't know if I could believe him. Not yet. But I held on to his words, a fragile thread of hope in the wreckage of our bond. Ethan's disappearance left a void, but also a strange relief. The house felt lighter, like it could breathe again, but I couldn't shake the image of him walking away into the rain. I kept his note, tucked it into the journal, a reminder that he was out there, carrying his own burdens. I didn't know if he'd keep his promise, if he'd try to make things right, or if he'd slip back into the darkness that had consumed him. All I knew was that I had to keep moving forward, rebuilding what he'd tried to break. I threw myself into my work at the community center, finding purpose in the kids I taught. They reminded me of Ethan before everything went wrong, full of dreams, rough around the edges, hungry for someone to believe in them. I started a scholarship fund with part of the lottery money, naming it after my mother, who'd always believed in second chances. Felt like a way to honor her, and maybe to heal myself. But every time I saw a young man with Ethan's build, my heart skipped, hoping and dreading it was him. Clara became a constant in my life, more than just a financial advisor. She'd sit with me over coffee, listening as I poured out my fears, my guilt, my longing for the son I'd lost. She never judged, just offered quiet wisdom. "You can't control what he does," she said one day, "but you can control what you carry." I started seeing a therapist, a gentle woman named Sarah who helped me untangle the knots of love and betrayal. She asked hard questions. Had I enabled Ethan's greed by always bailing him out? Had I missed the signs of his desperation? I didn't have answers, but speaking the questions aloud loosened their grip. Months passed, and Paul kept tabs on Ethan from a distance. He'd surfaced in a city a few states away, working odd jobs, staying out of trouble at least for now. Paul sent me a photo, grainy and taken from afar. Ethan was sitting on a park bench, staring at nothing, his face older than his years. I stared at that photo for hours, searching for the boy I knew, the man I hoped he could become. I didn't contact him. Not yet. But I kept the photo, a silent promise to myself that I wouldn't give up on him, even if he'd given up on me. One day, package arrived. No return address. Inside was a small, worn notebook, filled with Ethan's handwriting. It was a journal, like mine, but his. Page after page of his thoughts, his regrets, his struggle to claw his way back from the edge. "I wanted to be someone you'd be proud of," he wrote. "I lost sight of that. I lost sight of you." Tears fell as I read, each word a piece of the son I'd thought was gone. The last page held a single line, "I'm trying, Mom. I hope you'll see it someday." I showed the notebook to Sarah, who read it quietly, then looked at me. "What do you want to do with this?" she asked. I didn't know. Part of me wanted to find him, to tell him I still loved him, that I believed in him. But another part needed time, needed to heal from the wounds he'd left. I decided to write him a letter, not to send, but to hold on to, a way to sort through my feelings. I wrote about the pain, the love, the hope I still carried. I wrote about forgiveness, how it wasn't a gift I could give yet, but one I was working toward. The community center became my anchor. I expanded the cooking classes, started a mentorship program for at-risk teens. I saw Ethan in every kid who walked through the door, their defiance masking fear, their bravado hiding pain. I didn't try to save them. I'd learned I couldn't save anyone, not even my own son. But I could listen, guide, offer a hand. One boy, Marcus, reminded me so much of Ethan it hurt. He was angry, guarded, but he kept coming back, learning to chop vegetables, laughing at my bad jokes. One day, he hugged me, quick and awkward, and I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. As winter settled in, I got a call from Paul. Ethan had checked into a rehab program, one for gambling addiction. He'd reached out to Paul, asked him to tell me. He didn't want to burden you, Paul said, but he wanted you to know he's trying. I thanked Paul, my voice thick with emotion. I didn't know if Ethan's change was real, if it would last, but it was a start. I looked at his notebook, at the letter I'd written, and felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a willingness to wait, to see who he'd become. Winter turned to spring, and the world felt softer, like it was waking up with me. I kept Ethan's notebook on my nightstand, a quiet reminder of his promise, and mine. I didn't hear from him directly, but Paul sent updates. Ethan was still in rehab, attending meetings, working a steady job at a warehouse. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. I clung to them, not because I trusted him fully, but because I needed to believe in something. Sarah, my therapist, called it hope, not blind but cautious, a choice to see possibility in the midst of pain. The community center flourished, and I found myself smiling more, laughing with the kids, sharing stories with the other volunteers. Marcus, the boy who reminded me of Ethan, started opening up, telling me about his dreams of becoming a chef. I gave him my old recipe book, the one I'd used to teach Ethan how to make pancakes. He grinned, flipping through the pages, and I felt a pang grief for what was, hope for what could be. I was learning to hold both at once, the loss and the healing, the past and the future. One afternoon, Clara invited me to a charity gala, funded partly by my donations. I hesitated. I wasn't one for fancy events, but she insisted. I wore a simple navy dress, feeling out of place among the glittering crowd. The keynote speaker was a young woman who'd benefited from one of my scholarships, now studying medicine. She spoke about second chances, about people who believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. I cried, quietly, thinking of Ethan, of myself, of all the ways we'd failed and fought and still found a way to keep going. That night, I wrote another letter to Ethan, this one different. I told him about the gala, about Marcus, about the life I was building. I told him I was proud of his efforts, even if I couldn't trust them yet. I didn't send it, but I kept it with the first, a growing collection of words I wasn't ready to share. Sarah said writing was my way of processing, of reclaiming my voice. I started to see it as Moria Bridge. Maybe to a future where Ethan and I could talk again. Not as enemies, but as two people who'd survived the same storm. Summer brought a surprise, a call from Rachel. She'd moved to a new city, started a new job, and wanted to thank me. "You gave me courage," she said. "Watching you fight Ethan, I realized I could fight for myself too." We talked for hours. About healing. About the scars we carried. She'd heard about Ethan's rehab through a mutual friend and said he'd asked about me. "He's different," she said, cautiously. "Not fixed, but trying." I thanked her, my heart full and heavy. Rachel's strength reminded me of my own, of the woman I'd become through this ordeal. One evening, as I was closing up the community center, a familiar figure stood at the gate. Ethan. He looked healthier, his eyes clearer, but there was a nervousness in his stance, like he wasn't sure he was welcome. I froze, my keys dangling in my hand. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice soft. I nodded, leading him to a bench outside. The air was warm, the sky streaked with pink. He sat, hands clasped, and started talking. About rehab, about facing his addiction, about the shame of what he'd done to me. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I just needed you to know I'm trying to be better." I listened, my heart a tangle of emotions. I saw the boy I'd loved, the man he was trying to become, but I also saw the pain he'd caused, the trust he'd shattered. "I'm glad you're trying," I said finally, "but it's going to take time." He nodded, tears in his eyes. We sat in silence, the weight of our shared history between us. When he stood to leave, I didn't stop him, but I felt a shift, a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart. Back home, I pulled out his notebook, reread his words. I added a new page to my own journal, writing about that night, about the hope and fear and love that still lived in me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I was stronger than I'd been, more whole despite the cracks. I'd faced betrayal, fought for my truth, and found a purpose bigger than myself. Ethan's journey wasn't mine to control, but I could choose to keep my door open, just a little, for the possibility of redemption. The months that followed were quiet, a slow unfolding of days filled with routine and reflection. I didn't hear from Ethan again. Not directly, but Paul kept me updated. He was still working, still attending meetings, still piecing himself back together. I didn't know if he'd ever reach out again, or if I'd be ready if he did. But I carried his notebook, his words, as a reminder that change was possible. Even if it was slow, even if it hurt. I focused on my own healing, on the life I was building, on the people who filled it with light. The community center became my second home. Marcus graduated from the cooking program, landing a job at a local restaurant. He invited me to his first shift, proud and nervous, and I sat at the counter, tasting his food, seeing echoes of Ethan in his determination. I expanded the scholarship fund, reaching more kids. Giving them chances I wished I'd given Ethan before he'd lost his way. Clara and I worked on a new project. A shelter for women escaping abuse. A place for second chances. Felt right. Like a way to turn my pain into something good. Sarah, my therapist, helped me navigate the guilt that still lingered. I'd spent years blaming myself for Ethan's choices, wondering where I'd gone wrong. She taught me to let go, not of love, but of responsibility for his path. You gave him everything you could, she said. Now give yourself the same. I started to, little by little. I took up painting, something I'd loved as a girl but abandoned for survival. My canvases were messy, bold, full of color and emotion. Me story, in strokes of red and blue. One crisp fall morning, a letter arrived, this time with a postmark. Ethan's handwriting, steady now, not shaky like before. He wrote about his life, his job, the small apartment he'd rented. He was sober, working through his debts, trying to live honestly. I don't know if you'll ever trust me again, he wrote, but I'm trying to be someone you'd recognize. He included a photo, him standing outside a community garden, a shy smile on his face. I stared at it, my heart swelling and aching. I saw my son, not the man who'd betrayed me, but the one who was fighting to come back. I wrote back, my first letter to him in years. I told him about the community center, about Marcus, about the shelter. I told him I was proud of his efforts, that I hoped he'd keep going. I didn't promise forgiveness, didn't offer a reunion, but I left the door open. You're still my son, I wrote. That doesn't change. I mailed it, my hands steady, my heart lighter than it had been in years. It wasn't closure. Not exactly. But it was a beginning. As winter approached, I stood on my porch, watching the first snowfall. The house felt different now. Not a fortress but a home, filled with memories both painful and precious. I thought about justice, how I'd fought for it and won. Not just in the courtroom but in reclaiming my life. I thought about loyalty, how it lived in my love for Ethan, even after everything. And I thought about redemption, how it wasn't a moment but a journey. One Ethan was on, one I was on too. I went inside, lit a fire, and opened my journal. I wrote about the snow, about Ethan's letter, about the woman I'd become. I wrote about hope, how it wasn't a promise but a choice, one I made every day. The lottery money had changed my life, not because of what it bought but because of what it revealed about Ethan, about me, about the strength I didn't know I had. I closed the journal, set it beside Ethan's notebook, and smiled. He got nothing, not the money, not my defeat. But maybe, just maybe, he'd get a chance to find himself. And so would I.